Hello everyone, I'm Carlo, Google developer expert for Flutter and Dart, and Flutter tech specialist for Nurale. You can find some of my colleagues here in the networking room if you want some more information, but let's start with my talk. As I said, I just want to show for the newcomers what are the options that are available for Flutter navigation in app. But first of all, what is the navigation in Flutter? This is not to be confused with map navigation because that is another topic, but in my case is how you can change from one screen to another and navigate back. This is in Flutter is called navigation. It's called like that in many frameworks, but today we will see how to navigate our application. Clicking in one screen, going to another, getting back, and so on. Of course, this is not always so simple as going from screen A to screen B, but we can have several use cases like I have an authenticated flow, an unauthenticated flow, and I need to route the user based on my current status. We will see how we can do that later. So, how Flutter manage navigation? Basically, navigation in Flutter is managed with a stack-like structure. Each route we will have, each new screen, it's placed on the top of the old one, and we can go back and forth on this structure, and also we can replace some part of it. A key role of this is made by the navigator and the route. What are those two? The navigator is what manages a stack of routes and let us having some method to navigate inside our application. So for example, when I need to navigate to another screen, I need to obtain an instance of the navigator in order to do so. Let's see how later. And basically, as you can see, to have an instance of the navigator, we can use the navigator of context. It is this is basically using the inherited widget to obtain the closest instance of the class we call. In this case, for example, if we tap on a button, we go up to our widget tree until the first instance of the navigator, and then we get the navigator in the button context. This is used, it can be used basically everywhere. The important part is that we should have somewhere on the application a navigator on top of our tree. And then we have the route. The route basically is an entry in the navigator, and it represents our screen. This can be used to manage how the screen behaves and how it should enter or exit our application while navigating. The most simple way to start routing is with a material app. Material app is basically a convenience widget that includes a lot of information we need for what we will call a material application. But most important for this talk is that for when we use a material app, we know that we already have a navigator included with it. It also includes other information like theming or, for example, some internationalization. I think we have a talk later about that. But for now, let's stick with the navigator that we get for free with the material app. When we have our application, during the main, we can run our application. Usually, the first thing that we will have is a material application. Here, as I said, we can define something like the theming. In this case, I tried with the color red for the previous screen you saw. And our home. Our home will be the first route that we will have in our application. So every time we pop our navigation, we can go back to the widget we defined in the home. let's see how what available option we have for the navigation. We have two main ways to define our navigation: the imperative one and the declarative one. The imperative is the most commonly used right now. Basically, it's the simple navigation. The first one usually you learn when you start with Flutter, and the named navigation that is really useful, especially in web, because we can compose our URL by using the named navigation. And also the declarative one, that is the Navigator 2.0, where we have a more declarative approach, like we are using in Flutter. For example, when we change the state with a set state, we can change our navigation in the same way. Let's see first the simple navigation. Basically, every time we need to navigate with the simple navigation, we need to provide a route to our navigator to navigate with. We have some method to use. The first one I show you is the push. We can navigate to another route by simply pushing a route in the navigator. So we get the instance of our navigator, we call the method push of the navigator, and we provide a route. This will cause the new route to be appended right in the stack, and so we will have our new route, in this case the page 2, over our first page. Then we can also use the push replacement. The push replacement will do most the same. It will change the route, but it will not add it to the stack, but instead it will replace the last one. So if we have the 2 page like before, after the first push, and I call the replace, I will substitute the page 2 with a new page, in this case page 3. The syntax is the same. You get the instance of the navigator and you use the push replacement. Then we may need to go back. To go back, we can use the pop method of the navigator. This will remove from the stack the latest route we have. So the current one, it will be removed, and we can go back to the previous one. We also have the pop until. That is pretty useful if we need to go back in some previous screen, and instead of calling pop a number of times, we can just check with a predicate, checking the route we are trying to pop, when we want to stop. So for example, if we want to pop until page 3, we call the pop until and we check the route information to see if it is the route we want to stop on. Then we can do the same with the named navigation. The named navigation requires a little more of coding before we can start, because in our material app we need to define our routes, because for now with the named we just use the name of the route to navigate to the appropriate page. In this, as I said, is really useful on the web, because our application will start at simply slash, and we will add to the path the new routes. So for example, slash A will navigate to the page A in this case. The methods are more or less the same, but in this case the push needs a string and not directly a route. For example, pushing the page A with the named navigation, it required us to use the push named and pass the input slash A to navigate to the page A. At the same time, if we need to push the replacement, we can do that with push replacement named, and we pass the new name. It will work exactly the same as the simple navigation, but we are using the name. and the pop work exactly the same. We don't need to do anything, we just pop the navigation and the first route is removed from the stack. Also, we have pop until, but in this case we have another option because we can use the modal route with name as a predicate. Since we are now have set a name for each route, we can pop until the navigation with that name. This is really useful because we don't need complex predicate to navigate to the correct page back, but we just can get it by the name. It's really useful. Another advantage are those two methods that I show. Basically, the pop and push named. We will pop and push with a name instead of doing twice the job, because with the simple navigation we have to do first a pop and then a push. With the name and navigation we can do this in a single step. And the push named and remove until. Basically we can mix the pop until and the push by removing the previous screen and adding the new one. By using the remove, you don't trigger the pop. So the routes are directly removed from the stack without any callback added. And also, the other advantage of the named navigation is that, as I said, you have the URL for web, and it can also be used for deep linking in native application. Let's see how we can also send and return data. For example, we may have a screen that requires to show some information about the model we are using. So, in my sample for before, I tap on a store listing input, and I should navigate to the screen with the detail. But also, I want to send some information back, because if I tap on the cart icon, I want to add the item to the said cart. So, from screen A, I should navigate to B, passing the model in order to show the detail of said object. And then when I pop back, I need to send other information to say, I popped without doing anything, or I popped by adding the item to the cart. In order to go to the next screen in the simple navigation, we just, since we are pushing a route that we are creating on the fly, we just add the model in our widget like we do when we define any common widget. So let's just push with the material page route in this case, for example, and in our builder, in the widget we are pushing inside the route, we just provide the model we need to show. And when in the navigation named, we have a different way, because other than the string that defines the name of the route, as we said in the material app, so in this case the /detail, we can also provide an optional argument. The optional arguments can be easily retrieved inside our route by using the modal route off and getting the settings.argument to get the current model. This will be a dynamic, so we may need to cast the model to what we need to have, but this is an easy way to retrieve that. And now we need to return when we pop. The pop also give us a result, so the pop is a future. So when we call the navigation push, we can await for that future to know what is the result. So for example, when we navigate to the detail screen, we can await for said screen to pop, and in the after it pop, it will complete this future with the result. If we simply pop, we will have no result, but if we popped and added some something in the arguments of pop, we will find it in the future. So we check just for the type and handle the result. Also, we add some kind of special routes that are the pop-up routes. The pop-up route is what you have, for example, when you want to show a dialogue. A dialogue is simply a route, and even in the dialogue we can have a navigation. The particularity of the pop-up route is that they doesn't cover the whole screen, but also they cover a small area. The rest of the screen will be covered by the barrier color. That is something we define in the team. Is usually is a transparent dark color that cover the rest of the UI. Also, the pop-up route are obscuring the rest of the application. So even if it is transparent, we can't actually tap on the background screen because the tap will be blocked by the barrier. We can also define if, for example, we want the barrier to close the dialog or not, and so on. How we can show a pop-up route? We have some method already done by the Flutter SDK to show the pop-up route. Some examples are the show dialog, or the show menu, or show bottom model sheet. Basically, when we use the show dialog, we need to provide a widget in the builder that will be our pop-up widget. For example, in this case, I used the alert dialog to show something. In the action, I added the elevated button. Alert dialog is the easiest way because it's basically an already themed material dialog, and we just need to define some of the options. To close the pop-up route, since the pop-up route is still a route and is still inserted into the navigation stack, we simply call pop. And since it is a route, we can still return data from that. For example, if we have an alert dialog with the action to accept or close, we can have two buttons and simply return true and false in the pop method. We can wait for that in our show dialog method, because our show dialog method will return a future as well. And after that, we will know if the user accepted or cancelled what it was inside our dialog. Other kind of pop-up routes are the pop-up menu button or the drop-down, because since when we open the drop-down, usually in native Android, it will open as a small pop-up, and we can use that to show our options. Then we have custom routes. Until now, I used the material page route that is already defined material route that uses the common animation, for example, of transition when going from one screen to another. But we can't really define any custom route. I exaggerated on purpose the animation for this sample just to show that you can really do anything with a custom route. For example, this cool animation that I called weird animation route is done by overriding the duration of the material page route. Basically, I'm extending the material page route. I'm overriding the duration either for the transition, that is the duration when the route is coming in, and the reverse duration when we are popping that. In this case, I used some animation in the build transition to just create this exaggerate movement like old school comic journal when they come inside the route spinning out. And as you can see, I defined just one transition, but if we will go back for a moment to our fantastic animation, you can see that popping back will play it in reverse. We can also define, I didn't did in this case, but as you can see, we also have a secondary animation that is the animation of the route on the bottom. So we can animate both route in order to have a transition that works for both. How to use our custom transition, a custom route, sorry. In the simple navigation, we just provide instead the material page route as we did until now. We just provide our new route. Because since we are always providing directly a route, we can just use our new defined route here. Then for the custom route in named navigation, things are a little different because we need to, we have only the push named, so we don't really can define our custom route there, but in our material app, we can use the onGenerate route to check what is the route name and return another route instead of the default one. The default one in the material app is a material page route. So now some example about declarative navigation, because this is what Navigator 2.0 define. We have since now saw the imperative, basically the navigator.push, this is the imperative way, but we can also use the declarative way of changing things. So we change some variable, we update our state, and the application will react to that. This use the page API. Basically, we can define inside our material application a navigator and provide some page. As you can see, now the stack of our route, it's already defined in the navigator pages. So we have a material page with the home as a first route, and if I have a selected detail, I have another page on top of that. In this case, the detail page. Also, we need to define the I went too fast. We need also to define on pop page in order to get back. So this time, what I need to do for navigation is instead of using the navigator, I simply change our variable. Let's make a sample. I want in the home to go to the detail page. What I need to do is to use any state management to navigate by providing the selected detail. For example, the most basic example, if I have everything on one page, don't do that ever, please. I can simply use the set state to set the value of selected detail. When I do that, I will have my animation with the material page and the new route will pop in. And then on the back, I can simply use the set state to get back. But this can be also done with a more complex state management. For example, if we are using BLoC, I will have my BLoC on top of the navigator, and I will change my variable in the BLoC. This will notify the change to the children, and the navigator will update accordingly. Also, for example, in the case I specified before, we can leverage these to understand if the user is logged in, don't go to the detail page, but instead go to the login page. So we will have the navigator routing us to the correct page in any case. And that's all. Thank you for listening to me. If you have any question for me, I'm here, and I hope to know the answer for you.